Dwayne Wade's son is in the news. He has recently changed his gender from male to female. I believe this is in California, so the laws over there are a lot more relaxed, a lot more liberal. Now, just to clarify, if you're in this country, you can do whatever you want. You can have whatever belief system, you can change your gender identity, you can orient yourself however you like. This is a free country, you have access, you have opportunity, and generally that applies to when you're over 18. Now, if you're under 18, this now becomes a problem if there are certain organizations, government institutions, society, your peers, the general culture is pressuring you and encouraging you as an individual to do something that may go against your biological interest. And if you're young, you're impressionable, you kind of adopt that worldview. Now, this is nuanced because you have Dwayne Wade, you have his ex-wife, and they have a child together. And the ex-wife did not want this circumstance to happen, but she was ruled out of the equation. Dwayne Wade has a lot more status, financial means, influence, and so the child was able to legally change his gender. Now she identifies as a female. So this is a much bigger picture. Of course, you're going to have the nuanced situation where if you are a parent with your biological child, you have 50% of your DNA in that child. The wife, the other parent, has 50% of her DNA in that child. There is a stipulation, just generally speaking, that government and society should not intrude on that family, even if there are things that we do not condone. Now, the government does intervene when individual rights are being infringed on, and it's at such a drastic level that now the government has to intervene on. But we do not want government to intervene if it's something minor, if it's not infringing on someone's rights, because the parents have a responsibility, a duty, and a priority when it comes to influencing their child, even if we condone it or if we don't condone it. I'll give both sides to that equation. A lot of people may say, oh, Dwayne Wade should not be able to have this kind of influence on his kid. On the flip side of this, you may have people say, oh, these conservatives should not be able to teach their ideology to their children. So we can see how this applies on both sides of the spectrum. In both of those situations, they have a right as parents to influence their children how they see fit. That is their DNA lineage, and so that's why I'm saying there's a biological nuance there. But in general, from a societal point of view, we as individuals, if we want to cultivate the right culture, the right ideology, and ultimately that scales to a better nation, because we all have to have certain values, even though we're a melting pot of the world, America, where we have different races, ethnicities, different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, we all need to come together with American values. Opportunity, individual rights, limited government, entrepreneurship. These are the things that have made America prosperous, more prosperous than any other nation ever in history, even the nations that exist right now who are trying to eat our lunch like China. So when we look at this situation, we see why has this rate of identification culture changed drastically. A lot more people are identifying with this culture, and that's because it's getting pushed onto society. Generally, historically speaking, it's been a much lower number, and people will say, oh, well, that's because they didn't have opportunity, they didn't have rights back then, or was shamed. That's a fair argument, that's a fair reason to make, but it's scaling at such a drastic level, it's disproportionate to all the data that we've ever seen. Now, people can do what they want. I've said that before. It becomes a problem when this is now being enforced on the general population, not just the minority of the population, which if you look at a proportional distribution of our demographics of a population, you would see it would only be a small percentage of the people who fall into this category. You would have, like, for example, you would have a certain group of people that would fall in the category of men, certain people that would fall into the category of women, certain people that would fall into the category of being a construction worker. Like, there are proportional distributions in a general society. Of course, that changes society to society, but from a biological point of view, we have the data historically, we've had it for a long period of time, and we are the same creatures as we were a few 100,000 years ago. The only difference is we have new technology. We have the internet, we can communicate differently, we have digital devices, we're being integrated onto a artificial intelligence system, which we're still kind of looking at the potential for that, positive and negative. But when we see what I'll lay this out, and I'll say this in a very articulate manner. There have always been people, let's use the past 200 years, who have come up with certain ideologies that they deem is their ideology that they want to spread onto the world. They want their ideology to win out. And these people were generally at the top of the hierarchy, which does not necessarily make them the most intelligent or the most righteous or the most ethical. but they've gone to the top of the hierarchy. Now, I will say a good amount of them have and were intelligent, but a lot of them, from an objective point of view, or rather objective if our goal is to reproduce with this planet and potentially become a space-bearing civilization and reproduce in space, from that objective goal, their ideology of hindering the population, restricting the population, controlling and surveying the population through digital means, and reducing what we have here on Earth for whatever their distorted ideology is, that is the opposite of what our objective goal should be. If we want to grow this planet, we want to grow the pie, we want to have more Mozarts, more Albert Einsteins, we need to understand that that requires more population. Right now we're seeing throughout all the Western nations, predominantly the Western nations, a lot of people are slowing down in their reproduction. Women are told to work for a longer period of time in their 20s, so now their best fertile years are being wasted, quite frankly. Men are being told to be more feminine, and so there's less masculine men out there in the world, and when you have less masculine men, they're less attractive to women. So we are seeing a huge shift in culture, a huge shift in sexual dynamics, and that inherently creates a population that is staggered or stagnant and potentially reduces over time. So now we're stagnating the population as a whole, and there are also other reasons, right? A family who is well off, they may have 2 kids, and now they don't have to worry about infant mortality because they know that they have the hygiene, the medical treatment, medical care, and so they're good with the 2 kids. Whereas before, families would have to have a lot more kids, and only a few of them would survive, and also they were on big farms, big plantations, and they would have to get help, which would be their kids, to help with the farm, to help with the ranch, wherever they're at. We're in a much more industrialized, specialized nation now, and it's actually globalized, so that is also a contributing factor. But for people at the top to implement their ideology into different institutions, and these institutions are spread out and they're also heavily on the left, so they all have the same type of ideology, and it trickles down into society. And especially when you go into the Hollywood scene, the athlete celebrity scene, where they're not politically savvy, they're more just, most people are following the herd. Most people are bandwagoning. So even if you're an athlete, even if you're at the top of the hierarchy in the celebrity world, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're intelligent. A lot of times they just follow the herd because they want to maintain their position in the hierarchy. And they're willing to go to such dire constraints of sacrificing their ideology. Sometimes it's our brains play a psychological trick on us where if we know that we're dependent on something for fame, money, status, which is like our form of survival relative to what we think survival is, we will hold on to an idea or a belief and adopt it and actually believe in it, even though if we did some critical thinking, we would see that it's opposite of what we actually want, but we would buy into it. We would buy into that idea because we're dependent on a certain system. And so a lot of these celebrities are dependent on the system. They buy into the belief, and with that comes a lot of negative repercussions because now they spread that, how we would see negative ideology for humanity, they would spread that ideology to their audience and to people around them. And of course, when you have celebrities who have millions of followers, that compounds onto Western nations, because right now it's mostly the Western nations who have been indoctrinated with a certain ideology to make men feminize and to make women masculine. This is not what we want. Now, when it comes to a survival dependent role, or when it comes to survival in general, like we see in the more Eastern, let's say the more Asian countries, and of course there's parts of the Middle East and parts of Africa that also deal with this. They have to worry about getting food that day. They have to worry about surviving day to day. That's their main focus. And that's where the roles, the gender roles, come to their biological realities. If we view that from a biological perspective, and we see how we're so different in the West because we've lived this extravagant life of pleasure-seeking lifestyles, and our technology, our standard of living, everything is at the maximum. Everything is at the height relative to where it was just a few hundred years ago. We are seeing a huge contrast of how we're living in the West and how other people are living in the East who are still living as if people were living a few hundred years ago. So when we look at biology, biology doesn't change within the matter of 50 years, which all this technology has come about in the past 50 years. That's why we're seeing a huge influx of new distorted and perverted ideologies, because people have it so good, they have to create more problems for themselves. It's inherent, it's innate. Humans want to solve problems. and then you're going to have an influx of different ideologies, and so people adopt these ideologies, and it's a very, I'm trying to put it into words, but it's a very distorted way of viewing the world because you already have everything that you need. Humans have not evolved to experience the world around us. It's something that is, if you had asked someone 100 years ago that life would be what it is now for the average person in North America, they wouldn't have believed you. That you have a phone, that you can punch in numbers and communicate with someone on the other side of the world, that you can fly in a tube across the sky, that you can have a not a horse and buggy, but a vehicle where you're confined and it has AC and heating and you can go at speeds of 200 miles per hour. Well, the car can do that. Not saying you should do that. That would be unheard of. That would be unfathomable. It wouldn't be a concept that people could understand 100, 200, 300 years ago. It would be so foreign. And so we have to understand that our biology is still the same, yet what society is enforcing onto the culture, onto the people, because like I said, there's a top-down perspective that people want to implement, that is distorting our reality, a lot of people's realities. And sooner or later, I won't say sooner or later, some people will wake up, some people will not wake up, and they'll live that lifestyle. And for a lot of people, they can be coddled into that lifestyle because everyone around them is part of that lifestyle. And again, you can do whatever you want in this country, but this is an intellectual problem-solving equation of where we're at now and how this contrasts from our biological or general biological history. Not to say we can't evolve. We will most likely evolve in the next hundreds of thousands of millions of years, but where we're at right now is such a significant change from where we've been in the past, and all this technology is very quick, and we've adapted to it, but a lot of people have taken it too far in a sense of distorting where they are in reality to a fantasy that they have in their head.